Alpine High School for 5 years. And so I decided that I wanted to move and do something else. And Jefferson County Schools, where I was teaching, had something which they called their Professional Development Academy. And they had a lot of university credit courses, and they would list them and advertise them to all the staff. And so they were offering a master's degree in educational program evaluation. And you could get it by attending on Friday evenings and all day Saturdays for a year. So I read that to my wife and I said, I want to do this, and you're going to resent the hell out of it if you don't do it too. So I think we should both do it. And so we'll be together on all day Saturdays getting this master's degree. So she said, okay, I'll do that. So the two of us enrolled in this master's degree program, which was being offered by Western Michigan University. I mean, you actually got your degree from Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo. And ever since then, I've been getting uh, letters from Western Michigan saying, you should give us money. And I keep thinking, well, it was a great program, but I've never been to Kalamazoo, Michigan. I have no feeling for Western Michigan University, but the thing was free. So they must have had a huge grant to do it. And they sent in really excellent professors. So I took program evaluation from Daniel Stufflebean. Stufflebean was a famous guy at that time in the field. I took measurement from Stephen Jewers. I took beginning statistics from Jackson Barnett. All of these people were people you could look up online and read about. And so it was an excellent program. And when it was over, um, I started talking to Lori and to Brian Stetcher about the possibility of going from that into a doctoral program. So Lori, uh, her name was Lori Shepard then at Pomona, she was Lori Santillo. She had gone directly into a doctoral program, and she was already highly regarded on the faculty at the University of Colorado in this doctoral program in educational research and evaluation methodology. And so I called her, having been a friend at Pomona, and said, so if I go into this doctoral program, do you think I'll be able to get a job? And she said, oh, yeah. I mean, everybody, all these federal programs now have a requirement that they be evaluated. Nobody knows what that means or how to do it. And so there's that. But people are, there's departments of educational research methodology, and we've got this guy, Gene Glass, who's a famous statistician, and we think, we can hang on to him for 4 or 5 years while you come up here and study. So that would be good. So she said, yeah, without hesitation, I think you should do that. And at the same time, it seems to me, Brian, that you uh, had gotten a master's in math education and were involved in a program of working with youth on math. And I called you and said, why don't we get PhDs in this stuff? And you looked into it and decided to go to UCLA. Is that right?
Yes. As a simple summary, it's absolutely right.
And why did you do that?
As I I can't give a simple answer, but I started getting involved in evaluations of the program I was running. And I liked that analytic slice of things. Seeing whether or not they worked was a little easier and more satisfying than trying to raise money to keep the damn thing going.
And then subsequently, you and I co-authored a book called How to Design an Evaluation,
How to focus an evaluation.
Focus and Evaluation. And so I was curious what happened to that book. So
Well,
yesterday, I went into Google Scholar and saw that it had been cited, it's 276 times. And I thought, well, that's good. I don't know. I think more than 276 people actually read it, but I was pleased. So this doctoral program, uh, I really wanted to ask Lori if she'd been here today, how this happened, because they must have gotten a huge grant to develop this doctoral program. And because I never paid a penny of tuition, I mean, the whole time that I was a doctoral student, I was immediately somebody's teacher assistant and then a research assistant. And the assistantship always included my tuition as part of the salary. And we had this room in the School of Education at CU, um, called the Laboratory of Educational Research, and it had 10 desks in it. And there were 10 doctoral students. And it always seemed to me that no new doctoral student was admitted until somebody graduated and left and a desk became available. And then they would admit a student to fill that desk. And so there were always 10 of us who had desks in the same big room. And at all different stages of our doctoral program. And Gene Glass, the head statistician, liked to sit in the student room and talk to us. And the thing that was so irritating about this guy was that he would sit and, be in there and chatting away with us for 3 hours. And then he'd say, well, now, what have you accomplished this morning? And we'd say, nothing. We've been sitting here talking to each other and talking to you. He says, well, I just finished writing an article and while we were talking. And so that was my productivity for the morning. I would think, son of a gun, how can this? I mean, he was one of the more brilliant human beings I think I'd run across. But I loved that experience. And I tried to sort of replicate that idea of a doctoral lab, um, with that name taken from science, that the students had desks, they had offices, they were expected to come in. I came in every day and sat in that room and read, wrote, talked to other students. If I was confused about anything, I would ask a doctoral student who was ahead of me in the program to help me understand it rather than going to faculty. And, I think that because the faculty, when there was data analyses to be done, often passed them off on their research assistant, uh, we were up to date on all the new software revisions, much more than the faculty were. I think we actually got better uh, at, at running some of these analysis on SPSS, which was a statistical program for the social sciences, or there was the medical one, there were SAS. I knew how to program and analyze in three or four of those programs by the time I finished my doctoral program. Um, so then
Hey, Alan, I'm sorry to interrupt, but somebody needs to mute.
It's
There's
filthy. It's filthy.
Yeah,
you need
could
to
all
mute.
the
Mute
people who are not
yourself.
Alan mute themselves? That would help because we're getting an echo and some other noise both.
Yeah.
I'm
Hmm.
not echoing.
Yes, you are.
Oh,
Every,
sorry.
Mute.
Mute yourself, please.
Uh, so moving ahead, when I finished, um, it had not occurred to me to work in a university. I had wanted to be an evaluator and on the ground researcher. And I immediately got a job with Jefferson County Schools, where I had been a teacher in their Department of Research and Evaluation in the school district. And I enjoyed that, but they had immediately had a funding cutback and eliminated my position. So then I went to work with the Northwest Regional Educational Lab based in Portland, Oregon, in Title One. I had an actual card from the U.S. Department of Education saying that I was working for the U.S. Department of Education and occasionally went to Washington, D.C. for meetings. And so I was doing workshops all over states like New Mexico and Colorado and Wyoming on how to evaluate your federal education, federally funded education programs. And then we lost our contract to do that to a competing firm. And then the competing firm immediately hired me to become their deputy director of a Denver field office. And so I did that for a couple of years. But I became um, frustrated by the fact that you were in this kind of work always competing for funding, large federal grants, and that you could lose to your competition, and they might hire you, or you might be starting over looking for something. And meanwhile, my office was located just 3 blocks from the University of Colorado, Denver, and a doctoral student who had been ahead of me in the Laboratory of Educational Research at the University of Colorado chaired the department at the University of Colorado, Denver. And she asked me if I would teach a course for them. And the course would start at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and run till 7:30 and would meet once a week. So I said, yeah, I'd like to try that. And so I would just walk 3 blocks over to the university, teach this course, and then go home. And I liked it. And the next year, they had decided to advertise for an assistant professor, full time position, tenure track. And I applied for it and was hired at the University of Colorado, Denver. And so continued there for the next 35 years, going up the ranks from assistant professor to associate professor to full professor. And really uh, kind of wondered why I hadn't wanted to do that in the first place, because it was a great fit for me. I I've really enjoyed that career. Um, but it was very awkward for me at the beginning because the first thing they ask you when you're interviewing for such a position is, what is your research agenda? And the expectation is that you have a well articulated research agenda that's theoretically based and you are becoming a specialist in this field. And my honest answer to that is, working for RMC Research as their associate director, My research agenda is to do whatever my client needs done. And so I was writing and reading mainly in the field of evaluating federal education programs, policy analysis. My own dissertation had to do with educational policy analysis. Um, and so that's what I announced to the university was my research agenda. But I actually was eager to get away from that research agenda. And so that's another story that I want to tell. But right now, I want to take this side trip into looking at adolescence more broadly. I was moving toward um, doing research on the age group that I'd always taught, junior high students and high school students. And I had encountered so much cultural difference in those students that I really didn't feel that most of the research that had been done in the area of educational psychology could be applied across these groups of Navajo Indians, Hispanic kids in southern Colorado from old land grants. Um, and so a, a book came out um, called Cultural Psychology that I read. The that really moved me in the direction of um, seeing youth, adolescence, schooling as culturally situated and becoming really critical that so much of the established research was all basically done by white psychologists on white students in the United States. And Cole's book on cultural psychology was thrilling to me. And then I also got interested when I discovered that people were writing about a counterpart of adolescence in respect to mammals. And so that's been that's been an interest of mine recently. And I want to take a side trip into these animals for a while because I think that we human beings, so much of our speculation about ourselves ignores the fact that we're animals. We're mammals who have evolved and that we have a lot in common with other social mammals. And we shouldn't start with the assumption that we're unique, designed in the image of a God who looks just like us, and that we may not actually share anything fundamental with other animals. And so, taking sort of a functionalist evolutionary uh, attitude toward this seems to me a kind of a healthy side road. So, I want to talk about sperm whales, elephants, gorillas, chimpanzees, and bonobos. I want to end up with bonobos because they are closest relatives on the planet. And I just think it's fascinating how these kinds of things unfold in some of these social mammals. So I want to start with sperm whales. And the thing, sperm whales primarily eat squid. They also eat fish, but about 60% of their diet is squid. And the squid live on the floor of the ocean. And the sperm whales, let's start with a matriarchic group. There's a group of about 15 adult female sperm whales, and they get impregnated by male sperm whales that come by. They're not part of their pod. They come by, and the female agrees to mate with this male sperm whale, and then he takes off. There are no adult males in the group. So we have these mothers and their babies, and they have to nurse their babies for about a year. And so they found ways of hunting squid that are pretty cooperative. They will swim to the bottom and stir up the current and sort of force the squid to get off the ocean floor and to float up. And then they start to gobble them up as they're floating around in the water. And most of these pods are near the equator. And so it's pretty warm water, and there are these squids that they hunt collectively. So what's interesting is that they're having male babies and they're having female babies, and the babies are moving toward puberty. And when the young males reach puberty, the female group drives them away. And they drive them away because they are disruptive. They start fighting. They start wanting to mate with the other young females in the pod. Um, and there's all these social animals that live in small groups have evolved to have an understanding, so to speak, that they can't mate within their group, or they'll be, by inbreeding, end up with all kinds of inheritable genetic defects. And so when the males within the group reach sexual puberty, the females drive them away. And so when the males are driven away, they form their own group of young adolescent males, and they go to Arctic zones. And so the ones that I have the most familiarity with were down on the southern tip of New Zealand. And there's a trench that goes down 3,000 feet under the sea. And it's inhabited by giant squid. And there are these extra giant squid called colossal squid. And so the sperm whales, these young male sperm whales, dive down 3,000 feet to fight these 600-pound to 1,000-pound squid. And they're down there for an hour. When they come up, they're completely exhausted. They come to the surface and just lie there, catching their breath, breathing for several minutes. And I knew this because I encountered this when I was on a sabbatical in New Zealand and went down to the southern tip of the southern island and went out on a whale watching cruise. And they explained to me there's going to be these male sperm whales. They come every day. We'll use our sonar to find out exactly where they're going to be. And there they were. And so they would come to the surface and just lie there exhausted. The boat would come up within 10 feet of these huge sperm whales, and they just were motionless. And then after everybody got their pictures taken of the sperm whales, they would back off, and the sperm whales would get ready for another dive to the bottom. And they would have wounds all over their heads from giant suction cups from fighting giant squid. And, the sort of unanswerable question is, why do these guys want to hunt the most difficult prey that requires the most effort to get to, and end up getting injured in the process? But they, quote, chose to do that for a few years, until they were mature sperm whales, and then they would swim back up into the tropical waters where the females were and try to mate with somebody. And so I thought that this was just an extraordinary adolescent experience. Meanwhile, the female sperm whales were eventually driven off from their group too, but there's been a lot less research on where they go or what they do. But there's no sort of similar role. I mean, the idea is that the males have been driven away and they do not come back to try to mate with their mother or with their sister or somebody from the original pod. They go off to some place where they've never been before, so that you don't have this sort of genetic inbreeding. So, a lesson from this is that, at least in respect to the males of adolescents, they're disruptive to the group. They need to be driven away, and they need to not be allowed to come back after their adolescent forays from the group that they originated in. Then I want to switch to talk about elephants. There's been some interesting, Brian, are you trying to raise your hand? You're muted.
There I go. Can I ask a sort of analytic question, which is, did you just pick sperm whales because you liked what the male sperm whales did as an analogy for adolescent humans? Or is this a good fit for some other reason? Are humans a lot like sperm whales in other ways? I mean, what justifies this interesting story?
Adolescent male humans.
Yeah, I think when we get to the elephants too, it becomes clear my interest in this. It's partly that adolescent males tend to be disruptive to a social group, and the adults have to figure out some way to cope with them. And in the case of the sperm whales, they have no relationship with a father. There's no knowledge of any male father. With elephants, however, there's a strong relationship with a dominant male. And it makes a huge difference in elephants if the dominant males are missing. And so I want to go to that story next. So there have been examples, especially in the 1980s and 1990s, where elephant societies were powerfully disrupted by ivory poaching and by relocating elephants from one tourist park to another. So as human population in Africa keeps growing and there's less land set aside for elephants, and elephants can be very disruptive of agriculture by just wandering into your farm and eating everything. That elephants now in Africa exist almost exclusively in theme parks or preserves. And So there have been many instances in which, because the Chinese fetish for ivory, believing that it had the ability to increase sexual potency, uh, that Africans began killing the adult elephants that had the largest tusks. And the ones that had the largest tusks were the dominant males within the group. And people then began noticing that when enough of these very large dominant male elephants were removed because they were killed by poachers, the younger males began to run amok in very dangerous and unprecedented ways. In particular, they began to kill rhinoceroses. And people always knew that adolescent elephants like to sort of push rhinoceroses around, but there were no instances of them killing rhinoceroses. But in these parks, they began to routinely find dead rhinoceroses that had been gored by young male elephants or squashed by young male elephants. And people began documenting these fights. Um, Not only that, but the young male elephants would attack trucks and turn them over. They made life dangerous for tourists uh, by being unpredictable, and they would go in intentionally into human settlements and knock down huts and trample farms and so on. And so the problem people were at a loss first to understand why this was happening and then finally to figure out what to do about it. But to this date, the only thing that they have found that worked was to reinstall large male tusked elephants who would then go after the adolescent males, subdue them, and then life would return and become calm. They would stop acting out. They would submit to the dominant males. Meanwhile, um, the the female elephants um, also were much calmer and um, happier in the presence of the dominant male elephants that would only mate with them if they were invited to. I mean, female elephants choose their mates. They're not subjected to rape or anything like that. But there was this. They didn't want to mate with adolescent males. They wanted to mate with dominant, older, larger male elephants. A sort of a in innate knowledge of what kind of DNA would be best to pass along in the group. Uh, to mate with someone who was big and strong and not related to you. And so that's the same kind of phenomenon occurred not just from poaching, but by transporting dominant males to other parks and zoos and so on. And if too many of them were taken away, the same kind of phenomenon would happen. And so now it's widely understood that adolescent elephants require the presence of larger dominant males, or they really misbehave. Um, then the third example that I wanted to talk about was gorillas. And here we're getting more human-like, but the phenomenon is very similar. That if you go into mountain gorillas and something happens that adult males are killed, then younger males uh, become uh, unsettled, uh, start making advances on females that females don't want, and that the presence of dominant males creates a social order that's calming to everybody, and it can be seriously disrupted if some of those dominant males are killed or die prematurely. And it disrupts the whole group. But in particular, the young males try to reach that dominant status, but they're not yet white backs. They're black backs. They're not visually accepted as dominant by the other gorillas. And so there's a disruption to the chain. So getting closer to humans, we've got chimpanzees and bonobos. And so the bonobos, I don't think people knew about them like more than 30 years ago. Um, these are a smaller species. They are their own species. They look very much like chimpanzees. They're smaller. Um, the main difference is that chimpanzees are patriarchal. That is, the group is dominated by the dominant males, where the bonobos are matriarchal. The group is controlled by the dominant females. And that makes a lot of difference in how everybody behaves when they enter into puberty. Um, so with chimpanzees, um, the adolescent males, in order to acquire higher status within the group, um, try to dominate adult females in the group. But this triggers intense retaliation from the senior adult males who see them as threats and think that they have no um, business going after females. And so they regulate the adolescent behavior through physical intimidation. And adolescents risk getting in fights with older dominant males unless they constantly perform submissive rituals of crouching before the alpha males and vocalizing in ways that indicate submission. Um, and if they don't do that and appear to be threatening, they are in danger of being severely beaten by higher ranking male gorillas. Um, the um, in respect to the bonobos, however, um, the males, when they reach sexual puberty, their rank is determined by the rank of their mother. And high-ranking females, um, they intervene to protect their sons from older males. And if an adolescent male oversteps the boundaries, then high-ranking females will team up to chase him, socially ostracize him until he submits. And so order within the group is maintained by the females rather than by the males. Um, in the case of female chimpanzees, um, the established females view an adolescent female outsider as a threat, and they will fight against the female adolescent. Um, but the high status male chimpanzees will accept them, and if they offer to mate with them and offer grooming rituals and so on. Um, so uh, both groups expel their adolescents to prevent in-group breeding in their little group. And when an adolescent female um, chimpanzee migrates, she has to find acceptance and protection from male chimpanzees. But when a bonobo matches, she has to seek protection from the matriarchs, the females of this new group. So anyway, that's what I just find in some ways echoed with adolescent behavior of kids that I've worked with and done research on. And I want to move to talk about them. Leslie?
Oh, I was just going to say that book I was telling you about before we started today, Humankind by Rutger Bregman, was discussing chimpanzees and bonobos. And there was some theory about the rounder faces, the more baby-like faces of the bonobos as being an evolutionary distinction that sort of went along with kindness. This, for the people who weren't here, this is a book that I've been reading recently that's about the notion of whether or not people are inherently brutish or inherently kind, which is sort of a ridiculous distinction of being all one or the other. But they were talking about the matriarchal society of the bonobos was such that if there really was a troublesome male, they would bite off his penis. Okay,
Oh
so
my God.
we're talking, they could be violent if they wanted to, but we're talking serious matriarchy here.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that. But, well, so I want to start now. Where are we? Um, we don't have too much time. I'd like to talk about some of the projects that I've been involved in at the university that I found really interesting and rewarding myself. And I hope that I can tell about them in a way that's interesting. Um, so I found this book by Robert Cole called Cultural Psychology, and was very interested in it, and started a relationship with Robert Cole. He was professor at University of California in San Diego. Um, he had a chapter near the end of this book talking about an educational approach that he called the fifth dimension that involved kids in working with computers, that on projects that were fun, but also resulted in conceptual and practical learning. But the kids didn't understand that they were there to learn. And there were no grades or evaluations, but there were awards for going up levels in the game. And so I became intrigued with that idea, and so wrote to Robert Cole and said, could you give us advice on setting up a fifth dimension project in a middle school here in Denver. And he said, well, let me have you talk to my graduate assistant, Honorine Nokon, and because she has more experience actually setting these things up than I do. So we had a video conference. This was years before Zoom, where you had to set up the video conference in a special room and schedule it days in advance. And so here was Honorine Nokon telling us about the steps in developing a fifth dimension club. And so we set out, my friend Mark Clark, that I had connected with very quickly after joining the faculty, we decided we wanted to set up one of these clubs. And so we picked a junior high school in Northeast Denver that was predominantly African American. And we wrote a proposal, a field initiated study, FIS study. And we got funding to run this after school club. And we called it the Cyber Cougars. These were the Smiley Middle School Cougars. And so the Cyber Cougars were using computers in an after school club. And so when Honorine finished her doctoral program, she applied. We had an opening in educational psychology, and Honorine applied for this position. And so she actually came to work with me and at University of Colorado at Denver and helped us not only organize this after school club at Smiley, but to also begin to form a doctoral lab, which we call LOLA, the Lab of Learning and Activity. I don't want to get into activity and theory and so on, where that word came from, but it was really creating a home for me to let me work with adolescents, work with doctoral students who were interested in working with adolescents, having a grant that would pay people to be research assistants and help manage this after school program. And the first big program that we did, activity that we did at this middle school, was to invite a group of eighth graders to make digital stories. And I hired a guy named Daniel Weinschenker from the National Story Center, that's based in San Francisco, who had expertise in doing digital stories with adolescent kids. So the idea of a digital story is that you come up with a story that involves a change. Something about your life has changed, and you're going to make a film strip or a slideshow about that. And you start by talking about the story that you want to tell, identifying the change that you want to describe, and then writing a script. And the script goes through a few edits and rounds. And then when you've decided on this is the final script, then you you find photographs, you make photographs, you find things online, you create an image for each line of your script. And finally, the whole thing becomes put together and stored on a DVD. And with a DVD player, then you can show your digital story to outside audiences, but you can't change it because your voice has been recorded, your images have been finalized, your script can't be altered. So you hope to come up with a story that you're committed to and now can be shown in festivals of and at conferences and taken home and shown to your parents and so on. And so we would spend more than a month, more like 2 months, making one of each student making one of these things. And I I want to just share one of them with you right now that involves this young woman. She was 13. She was from Nigeria, and she came to the club and she said, "I want to make one of those digital stories." And I said, "Well, so what ideas do you have for your story?" And she said, "Well, the change is that I came from Nigeria to Denver, Colorado. And when I was in Nigeria, I was very happy. I had a lot of friends. And then I came here and I hate it. And people make fun of how I talk because I have an accent. And now they've put me in special education because they think that I have learning problems. But in Nigeria, I everybody was proud of me because I spoke 3 languages fluently. I spoke Igbo, I spoke English, and I spoke Yoruba. And I was doing so well academically that I got double promoted. She said, if I were in Nigeria, in Lagos, now where I came from, I would be graduating from high school. And here I am in the 8th grade. And with and people make fun of how I talk, and the fact that I speak 3 languages means nothing to them. They've never heard of those languages. Nobody even asked me about that. So she said, I want to start by finding a picture of an airplane. And I was so afraid to fly on an airplane. They go so high in the sky. And how do you know they're not going to crash? It was terrifying for me to get on an airplane to fly to the United States. And then when we got here, everything was different. And I'm in this school, and everybody is Black, but they wonder, why do I talk funny? And then I say, well, I'm from Africa. And then they say stupid things like, oh, you must be descended from a queen. All people in Africa are kings or queens, and they have this glorious history. And I said, no, we're just people. And she said, so that's what I want to tell about in my digital story. But she was so angry. Every time there was a particular task, like, let's talk about your script, let's write this down. No, I don't want to. And she would disappear. She would disappear for weeks. And I would think, well, we've driven her away. And then she would come back, but she would want to play a computer game instead of working on the digital story. But the uptick is that she finished this digital story, and it was put on a DVD, and she showed it to the class. She got a certificate. Everybody in the Cyber Cougars got a certificate if they finished their digital story. And she had everybody in the group sign her certificate. And later in the academic year, she got an award from the school for the most improved student. And she began to pass her classes, do well academically. And at the end of the year, she sent she sent an email to me entitled, Dear Cyber Cougars, I just want to say I'm sorry that I was such a pain and I got so angry and I insulted a lot of people. But the Cyber Cougars was the best thing that has ever happened to me. And I just, that experience, I mean, getting that email was amazing to me because I really had no, no idea what her experience had been, but it allowed her to communicate in a formal way that people sitting in an auditorium are sitting there watching when we would have a showing of our digital stories, that people would recognize her experience and how confusing and angering it was to be in a school where not only was she completely misinterpreted, but nobody actually took the time to figure out what her background and story was. So I think on Thursday I'd like to share a few other examples from that experience. I'll just go on to say that I took this experience, turned it into a conference presentation, and went to the annual meeting of the American Educational Research Association and presented this story about after the Cyber Cougar Club at Smiley Middle School. And after the presentation, a man came up to me and said, "I'm starting a new journal called THEN, Technology, uh, Humanities, and Education. And I would really appreciate it if you would write up this presentation as a journal article and submit it to my new journal." So I thought, wow, this is going to get published no matter what I do. So I basically poured my heart out into it, not worrying too much about the formality of external review. It was externally reviewed, and it was published as article number 1 in issue number 1 of this journal. And I was just telling this story to a friend of mine who is at the University of Colorado here in Boulder, uh, Dean for Research in the School of Education and Human Development. And I told him this story, and he said, "I presented in that same session, and I presented my work to that same guy." And my article was published in the same issue of the journal as yours was, Alan. And I thought, this is historic for me. So anyway, that's end of the story for today. It just launched me on really being fascinated by personal narrative as a way to not only reflect on one's life, but to take ownership of an identity, and also to embrace a change that you had declared had happened with you. And now that it's unchangeable and viewed by audiences, what impact does that have on the person who created the story?
Okay, Alan, you never did ask me for that picture, by the way.
Oh yeah, show it. Can you?
Okay. Uh, just give me a second here. And meanwhile, I have about 30 questions for you. And but while I'm getting the picture up, can you just briefly tell us what your takeaway from the elephants, bonobos, and whales is? Because we heard, okay, adolescent males are misbehaving and they're dealt with different ways. But I don't, maybe I missed it, but I don't know what your intention was with regard to human males. And let me get the picture up while you're answering.
Well, one concern I have, and it's a very delicate thing to talk about, is that I've spent years. Okay, so this is the the cyber cougar after school club, and there I am, um, and some of the kids working on digital stories are in the front here. The older African American guy sitting behind the kid with the earphones uh, was somebody at the University of Colorado, a graduate student in digital media who went off to work with Lee, making movies about African American life. Um, but anyway, I just loved being able to hire kid young people who knew so much more about this technology than I did to help facilitate this group. Um,
Is the girl you talked about in this picture?
no,
Okay.
no, and uh, so kids are scattered all around the room, and it was a different kind of facility each night. The kid who's got the headphones on is somebody I'd like to talk about briefly on next week. Um,
So, Alan,
yeah,
I have a question following up on your comments about the various animals, whales and bonobos and gorillas and whatnot. Um, One of the things that's had in the past, at least, been notable about middle school education, especially, maybe not so much high school, is that most of the teachers are female. And um, my middle school that went out of its way to have um, male teachers at the middle school level who were charismatic and influential. But I think that was fairly uncommon. Is there something, I mean, is there an implication, especially since you're in educational psychology, for middle school education about dealing with that, and maybe high school as well, about
it's a great question, and it brings back, it kind of forces me to deal with Tony's question too, about what do the chimpanzees have to do with human beings and so on. And I think one of the issues that's just not talked about is the absence of Black fathers in American society. I mean, at Spiley Middle School, I don't believe there was a single male. There was not one male teacher. And I think that part of the explanation is that it's a very rare African American male who would aspire to be a teacher. And I got so interested in this, but uh, Black authors have written about this for years, but it's not spoken about outside of the Black community. Um, with slavery, it was always understood that a family could be broken up, a father could be sold to a different plantation. Black women knew that they were likely to be separated from their husband, whether they wanted to be or not. And after the end of slavery, um, there was never an understanding that marriage was going to be a permanent relationship uh, within the Black community. At Spiley, uh, I rarely uh, met a boy who had a father figure in the home. Later, when I went on to work on high school issues of dropping out of high school and alternative high schools designed to bring students back so that they would graduate who had previously dropped out, they had a group that met on Fridays where the girls all met with Dominique, a black female teacher on the faculty, and the male students all went to work with the black.
Tony,
With
the noise is coming from your screen.
Oh, okay. Uh, by the way, that is, um, there's only, let's see, thank.
Wait, you muted yourself, Tony. You muted yourself.
Okay, the only people that aren't muted are McEntee and Philby, and I did unmute myself to say something, but you're right.
You could
Uh,
Philby and McEntee. You have the power.
uh,
It's
please,
Philby because his screen gets a green line around it whenever his sound comes through. Can you mute? There, Philby's muted. Tony, I meant to ask you that a long time ago.
well, I could have done it a long time ago, but I thought it was rude, so I didn't. But yeah, I've muted them now. So
Thank you.
Philby and McEntee, if you want to say something, you can do it, but you're going to have to unmute yourself.
So Ellen,
I want to finish my sentence. I was working at this alternative school. All the students were black. The male students met with us with the black teacher in this little alternative high school, and one day they were talking about fatherhood, and no male in the school, including the teacher, had had a father that they knew. And so they asked me, they said, Alan, you're a father, right? I said, yeah. They said, could you talk about why someone would want to be a father, stay in a marriage, be burdened with kids, and what did it mean for you? And so I spent an hour talking about why being a father was a really important part of my identity, what pleasure and satisfaction I took from it, how I tried to behave in that role. And, I thought that, but I'm kind of heartbroken that this white guy had to go and talk to them about that because they either didn't know their biological father or he was in prison or he had died. And I think that, who was that guy that wrote a book in the federal government that wrote about that and was completely shut down as a racist, unfamiliar with black culture and stuff. I mean, it's that, working at Smiley and later at this alternative high school, I felt like I was being introduced to a secret culture that you're not supposed to talk about with white people. And I'm reluctant to talk about it too much myself.
so I'm curious. I'm wondering if you know if any of those kids went on to marry and become fathers. Do you know anything about their later lives? If there was an influence, or if any of them went on to become teachers?
Well, I know that some of the ones in my cyber cougar club did, but those were kids that had fathers.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
the
yeah.
kids in the cyber cougar club had had fathers in the home,
Yeah.
and when one of them dropped out, he made his digital storytelling and then got his certificate and then left. He quit meeting with us. His father was coming and saying, "You got to get my kid back." I mean, it's the only productive thing he's done all year, and he's being torn by his peer group who just want to mess up and rap and dance and get in trouble and entertain each other with what goofballs they are. And this cyber cougar thing is the only serious thing that he's done all year, and I really need him to stay, but it was a lost cause. I couldn't get him back.
I just want to say
Can I?
one tiny little thing before I run off because I'm going to have to go off. But one of the stories out of my middle school that I really loved was that one of the kids in my class, whose father was a rancher, and the expectation was, he wasn't, none of this like school stuff. He's going to go back and become a rancher, although I don't know in the Silicon Valley how much longer that would have lasted. But for some reason, he was inspired. He decided he wanted to be a teacher, like one of our male teachers in middle school. He went to San Jose State, and a few years later, he got an award as the top teacher in Santa Clara Valley in his high school field. And at his speech, he said the two people who'd influenced him most in that were his middle school teacher, Rod Myers, who was one I had as well, and his college advisor, who happened to be my dad. Anyway, I love that. So they had an influence, and it wasn't his dad really; it was his teachers. So,
can I interject?
Ingrid, just go.
I know, but it's hard. Everybody wants to talk. Anyway, as to Tony's question about the testosterone-loaded sperm whales and elephants, this does equate to humans, of course, because adolescent boys with their testosterone changes in their body it become very disruptive. And it's not just black boys, it's white boys too, whether they have a father or not. I was lucky to have several male teachers during middle school, and we had a kid in our class. We had a group of students that when Sputnik went up, the advanced classes got put together. So we were all the same classmates throughout the school, and this one kid was always a disruption. And I remember this incident clearly where our math teacher, Mr. Coy, just had it with him, picked him up, he was a little guy, stuffed him in the supply closet and shut the door. And until he started crying. And so he let him out, and the kid was good from there on. So it takes a firm hand to keep these boys in line. And of course, now our war guy is making sure that everybody in the military has a lot of testosterone.
I just read that. I thought it was mind blowing.
It's crazy.
So regarding beavers, I remember when I was up in Alaska, we followed some beavers who were taking down trees to where they actually had their dam and everything. And I think we had a naturalist with us who was explaining to us about the bank beaver, who were the adolescent males who refused to work on building the lodge. They just played. They just played the whole time. And so they weren't allowed in the lodge. They had to live for a year or two just with little holes in the bank because they wouldn't be allowed into the group unless they were ready to work. And I had referred to some of my young friends, not only male, who are adolescent bank beaver, but some of them are 40 years old.
Yeah, some of them never grow up.
We'll never get off this subject. This will last for the rest of our lives. Alan, it's about 20 after. Why don't we continue on Thursday? This has been...
Not Tuesday.
Right, Tuesday. Very interesting, and raised a huge amount of questions I'm sure everybody has. So let's just continue with it on Tuesday. And then maybe, Otis, I think you're up next. We might not even, I have a feeling we might not even finish Tuesday, so you can be flexible on that. Is that okay with everybody?
Yes. Thank you, Alan.
I'm really loving this. We gotta keep this.
Yeah, thanks, Alan.
Everybody's got to take their turn on this a lot, I think.
These stories are just wonderful. Yeah, this is great.
Cool, Alan. I'm sorry I won't be able to be there Tuesday, but I'm looking forward to at least looking at the video.
Great.
Okay, see you next time, buddy.